Hi everybody. In this video, we are breaking down the process of making a story made in collaboration with Midjourney, ChatGPT, and ElevenLabs. I emphasize the word collaboration. As you will see through this process, the story is not an automated process and done entirely by AI. You, as the creator, have editorial judgments to make that story, to shape the story. You can view the completed story in the video Never Fear a Nightclub Dancer on my channel, link in the description. I've made a separate video about creating consistent characters in Midjourney for this story, link in the description. Here are the steps in creating a story with AI that I will go over in this video. Origin of the story, drafting the script, editing the script, finding the visual style, the prompts, choosing a color palette, voicing the characters, identifying the motion style, implementation, and we'll conclude with the cost of making an AI story. Origin of the story. Our subject is a nightclub dancer. That topic came to me by this movie, Never Fear, about a dancer whose career is destroyed by polio. A story is sparked by curiosity. The seed for a story can come from anywhere. I chose a setting of Paris in 1926. A setting in Miami would be a very different story. I chose 1926 because I am fascinated with the 1920s in Europe, the period after the Great War, before the atrocities and horrors of what was coming in the 1930s and with World War II. Also, by chance, I recently watched another movie that is set in Paris in the 1920s, Quartet, a Merchant Ivory film starring the beautiful Isabelle Adjani. Drafting the script. You could sit down and write the story yourself. As a writer, you'll find tremendous satisfaction in that process. But that's a different approach. In this project, I wanted to explore what ChatGPT could create. I used ChatGPT 4 as of June 2023 for this story with no plugins enabled. We have our subject, Nightclub Dancer. We have our title, Never Fear a Nightclub Dancer. We have our setting, Paris, 1926. You can ask ChatGPT to create titles for you, and it does a very good job in suggesting sets of titles. But if you already have a title, then the words in the title are helpful in guiding ChatGPT. You want to specify the genre and attributes of a story in your prompt. Without specificity in your prompt, ChatGPT will provide you with stories filled with cliché scenarios, characters, and phrases. If you do not read a lot of literature, then you might not recognize those elements as cliché. I do admit that this story already has a familiar trope, the commonly used theme of an attractive female dancer and the male gaze. But we'll see if we can take that theme in a slightly different direction. I recommend starting with flash fiction, a form of short story that is usually less than 500 words. Here's the prompt. You are writing a story of fiction. Draft a work of flash fiction about a female nightclub dancer in Paris in 1926. The story is titled Never Fear a Nightclub Dancer. The tone of the story should be dark and emotional about the dancer's interaction with the club's surrealist customers. The story should capture this specific time and place. The story should have a sense of conflict. Do not provide a resolution to the conflict. Leave the reader with a sense of wonder as to what happens next in the life of the nightclub dancer. There are 8 elements to the prompt. Each element is a sentence in the prompt. Always keep in mind that ChatGPT is based on a large language model. Words and syntax are important in guiding the output of ChatGPT. Start with instructing ChatGPT about the task. This prepares the context for ChatGPT to understand what it is about to be told to do. Specify the genre, topic, and setting. Specify the title if you have one. Specify how the tone of the story impacts the main character's interactions with the other characters. Note that I also added in a descriptor about the other characters. I like that stories are of a place and of a time. All stories should have a sense of conflict. Don't assume ChatGPT will automatically add that into the story. You could provide an example of the type of conflict if you want to guide the story in a more specific direction. I wanted a story that did not have a neat cliche ending. The last sentence of the prompt reinforces the type of ending I want for the story. Editing the script. I like the story that ChatGPT generated. It's a concise story of 565 words. You could prompt the story to be shorter or longer depending upon your needs. With a longer story, you want to ensure that ChatGPT does not simply fluff up the word count with fluffy words. Adjectives are not friends of writers. Elade, that's a beautiful name. The name of the nightclub, La Chat Noir, the Black Cat. It's cliche, but that's okay. Later, you will see that Midjourney understands French and presents images with a black cat. Some of the phrases generated by ChatGPT are wonderful. The air was thick with the scent of absinthe and the whispers of revolution. A nightclub that was a haven for the avant-garde, the surrealists, the dreamers, and the dancers. But I also found sentences that I wanted to change that were repetitive, as well as sentences that I deleted entirely. You are creating a story in collaboration with ChatGPT. You can make decisions about what to include and not include in the story. Let's look more closely at how your editing of the story in collaboration with ChatGPT can make for a stronger story. The phrase about the patrons, they were artists and poets, philosophers and dreamers. That's a great phrase on its own, but it repeats the word dreamers from the first paragraph. Good writing is not repetitive. Good writing does not repeat a descriptive word like dreamers in a short story, especially not in a story this short. Indeed, in a novel, a 300-page story that's carefully written and edited, a word like dreamers would be used only one time. In the description of patrons, I also saw the opportunity for adding consonants to the line. Consonance is a lyrical device that repeats a consonant sound. I changed artists to painters. What to do about dreamers? I asked ChatGPT with this prompt. In this line, they were painters and poets, philosophers and dreamers. Suggest alternate words for dreamers. The word must begin with the letter P and reflect similar attitudes as painters, poets, philosophers, and dreamers. ChatGPT provided great alternatives. This is where ChatGPT is better than a thesaurus. Good writing is very careful about the use of words from a thesaurus. Be selective in your word choice. I like the word prophets, but I also like purveyors of the unseen. I modified the line so that the final version reads, they were painters and poets, philosophers and prophets, and purveyors of the unseen. Purveyors of the unseen. That's a nice line. If you're using ChatGPT as a writer for editing your own works, you want to be careful of plagiarism. Is purveyors of the unseen an original line? Is it a commonly used expression? Or is it lifted straight from another story? Google search reveals 3 instances of that exact phrase, including one from this story. A Google search on the singular purveyor of the unseen finds 4 results. It's not a unique line, but it does not seem to be from another story, though I don't think we can rule that out entirely. If I were more serious about this story as a work of literature, I would refine the phrases much further. But for our purposes with this story, I'm comfortable in sticking with purveyors of the unseen. Problematic phrase. Elade, a dancer as enigmatic as the city itself. Here's how I responded to ChatGPT about that phrase. That sounds nice, but is cliche. Suggest alternate ways of describing this enigmatic dancer without using cliche expressions. I thought that all the metaphors supplied by ChatGPT were over the top, but it gave me ideas. Choose the bits suggested by ChatGPT and rearrange into what you'd like. Use ChatGPT for inspiration. In the end, I went with rewriting the original sentence so that it reads, Among those in this club danced Elodie, with a mystique as elusive as the shadows in the winding streets of Montmartre. The phrase, her sequin dress shimmering like 1,000 stars against the night sky. I asked ChatGPT to suggest alternate ways of describing her dress without using cliche expressions. The dress can be other fabrics than sequins. But ChatGPT is not good with metaphors. I revised the sentence so that it reads, her sequin dress, simmering in the eyes of those who watch her body sway to the rhythm of the musicians seated on the far edge of the stage. Perhaps this should be shimmered. I could have continued with further edits, but those are the 3 edits in the story that I asked ChatGPT to revise. Good writing is about revising. A first draft is about getting the concepts on paper. Most writing is revising. Finding the visual style. Now we turn to Midjourney. I knew I wanted to ask Midjourney for illustrations with an abstract, dynamic, fluid energy. You choose the style. I wanted images more painterly and not photographic. I started with abstract painting. You don't need to go with whatever Midjourney gives you. I had first tried adding the term European surrealism in the prompt, but I really disliked the style Midjourney gave me because it was not the style for this story. I also tried with color and shapes. Too Kandinsky-like, though I adore Kandinsky. I tried nudging the style towards engraving. That did not work as I hoped, but I kept in the style of engraving in the prompt, though I hardly call the results anything like engraving. But I have found the start of almost all the prompts used in this story. Abstract painting in the style of engraving. The engraving came from my interest in the work of Stanley William Hayter, but I did not want to create images purely in his style. I don't like those type of shortcuts in Midjourney, and his style would be too abstract for this story. But I wondered, are there terms describing Hayter's style that I could use for inspiration? I uploaded an image by Hayter to Midjourney and used the describe command. 2 terms stood out: emotive figural distortions, connected lines and curves. After I found the characters for this story, I no longer use emotive figural distortions in the prompt. But that's a good term for adding distortion when you seek an abstract representation of a person. I chose to use connected lines and curves for only one character, Elodie. After all, she's a dancer. The movement makes sense as a means of distinguishing the visual style of her character from the others. I also added the inspired by mathematics to connected lines and curves for a stronger sense of variation. Choosing a color palette. I wanted a color palette that was consistent for all the images. A limited color palette helps tie together images. For the color palette, I provided ChatGPT with this prompt that builds on the visual style that I had defined. For illustrations depicting this story, suggest 3 colors. The colors to represent the story. The illustrations will be in the style of indaglio engravings, abstract expressionism, with emotive figural distortions and connected lines and curves. Recommend colors that best situate the story within this artistic style. I really like how ChatGPT provided context for explaining its choices for colors. I like the midnight blue and crimson red. Gold could be overpowering. For the overall color palette, I chose midnight blue, crimson red, and lines of gold. I also wanted the color palette to change slightly depending on which main character was featured in the scene. We have 2 main characters, Elodie, the dancer, and Marcel, the painter. I asked ChatGPT, continuing with redefining the color palette, what color palette best represents the 2 main characters of Elodie and Marcel? The palette for each character should be different, should contrast, but also be in harmony with each other. ChatGPT gave superb recommendations for modifying the color palettes for each character, along with explanations as to how the colors accentuated aspects of the character's personality and traits. Note that ChatGPT remembered the story and gave me quotes from the story that it associated with the choice of each color. This is truly next level assistance that you do not get from a search engine. You have to call that a thoughtful response. Creating Midjourney prompts for parrots in the nightclub. Having settled on the core prompt of abstract painting in the style of engraving in the heart of Paris 1926, Midjourney gave me a variety of images, including a classic image in the upper left. But my story takes place at night. I also added a color palette to the prompt. At night, midnight gold, crimson, red. That was too gold, too red. But the upper left image came in useful as a quick transition image. Modifying gold to blue changed significantly and gave me a nice living room. I re-rolled a few times. I got a wonderfully classic image of Paris at night and another swirling image that served as a transition into the story. I then added phrases from the story to the end of that prompt to generate a variety of images. You can see how that works in this example. You can re-roll and try variations until you find images that you like. Moving to the interior of the club, I kept the same core prompt. Add a descriptive attribute of interior a la Chat Noir, a nightclub, and then added phrases from the story to the end of the prompt. Notice the black cats. The story could have taken a very different turn with all the characters as cats. Creating prompts for patrons of the nightclub. Getting the black cats out of the scene was a challenge that I solved through the following method. After several re-rolls of this prompt that followed the same structure I've described of core prompt plus setting plus phrase from the story, I settled on an image that would serve as an image prompt for other scenes involving the patrons of the nightclub. With the image prompt, I did not repeat the core prompt or the full setting, but I did find that it worked best if I included Paris 1926 in the prompt. Otherwise, the clothing and appearances of the patrons might not fit the 1920s. Rerolling is a necessity to get images that work for the scene. In some cases, I added the term close-up audience in the nightclub before the text from the story. Really like how the expressions on the women's faces fit the phrase, intimidated by the raw emotion of their dreams. Imagine, in this scene, they are watching ElevenLabs dance. They are with these men who seem disinterested in everything. Note this person with a very androgynous appearance that would not be out of place for Paris in the 1920s. The same formula used here. The man looking directly at the camera. In this story, this would be from ElevenLabs' point of view. He is watching her with a mix of fascination and fear, and the discomfort of the woman next to him. What is their story? I do encourage you to watch the movie Quartet for insights on couples and relationships in Paris nightclubs during the 1920s. In addition to Isabel and Johnny, the film has great performances by Alan Bates and Maggie Smith. The movie is based on a novel by Jean Rhys, who lived in Paris during those years. Voicing the characters. The only character who speaks in this story is Marcel, but he only speaks one line. The story is narrated. What AI tool can I use for narration? I have access to Azure Cognitive Services via Microsoft. I've used many of those voices in other videos, but I'm not being entirely pleased with the out-of-the-box voices supplied by Microsoft. I remember someone had commented on a previous video to try ElevenLabs. I'm going to do a detailed review of ElevenLabs in an upcoming video. I like the results. I used the Axel male voice for this narration. For the amount of text I used in this story, I did have to purchase a paid plan, but I feel that it's a good value. Identifying the motion style. AI animation is very popular, and there are a lot of developments with using AI tools for animating images and even text to animation. I have not yet dove into those tools. I plan to do so. It's likely that I will create a future version or variation of the story using AI animation. I opted for a simple slideshow of images with a voice-over narration. Another direction the story could take is as a visual novel. A future version might go in that direction if I want to further explore the lives of these characters. Implementation. For a slideshow with some transitions between images, my favorite video editing software is DaVinci Resolve. I do have the studio version, though you should be able to do everything you need for this type of story with the free version. Cost of making an AI story. The biggest cost is my time. Developing the story, which is less than 3 minutes of video, took several days. It could be done faster. I did enjoy the process. In Midjourney, I created 241 images for this project. I selected 67 of those 241 images for the final video. In Midjourney, that's almost 3 hours of fast time utilized for a single project. For a project of this size and using these tools, you will need a few subscriptions. ChatGPT 4 subscription at $20 a month. ElevenLabs have various subscription prices. I started with a $5 a month plan. Midjourney subscription, I used the $30 a month standard plan. Thanks for watching till the end. If you made it this far, did anyone make it this far? Please leave a comment on what you found most useful or what you'd like to know more about. Enjoy creating images.